Hello, folks. So my name is Craig Farmer, and I am the author of Kwame Crashes the Underworld and A Method of Magic and Misfortune with Roaring Brook Press, which is an imprint of Macmillan Publishing. I'm very, very excited to create a presentation for the Writers Workout Conference 2025. My specific title is going to be From Fan Fiction to Creative Fiction. So shout out to all my fan fiction writers. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to start my timer just to make sure that I am on time. I want to go ahead and turn off my video, but you all should still be able to see this screen. Okay. Very, very excited for this. Okay. So, just for a little bit of background, so my relationship with stories is a long one. And so my mother was a reading specialist, which meant that I grew up around so many books. I was buried in books. And I have to be honest, I think that out of all the books that I had, the Percy Jackson books were the ones that resonated with me the most. I mean, they were my favorite book series. They were accessible and they were fun and they were complete with all these lovable characters and rich mythologies and unique powers. And I remember thinking to myself that all books should be like this. All books should have accessible language. All books should be easy to understand. They should be easy to engage with. They should be funny. They should be interesting. Um, they should not seem like they are keeping the reader at an arm's length by using, all these vocabulary words that I felt like I wasn't sure what they meant. So instead, I thought to myself, you know what? These are how books are supposed to look. And so, if I'm being honest, Percy Jackson was the one that created an appetite for reading. And my appetite didn't stop there. It eventually created this inspiration for writing. And so my foray into fan fiction was pretty quick. And so I started writing fan fiction when I was about 12 years old. So for context, the first Percy Jackson book came out in 2006 when I was 10 years old. By age 12, I was, knee deep in the Percy Jackson lore. And pretty quickly, I found myself starting to write fan fiction just because that inspiration had taken over me so deeply. So my creativity, my writing creativity started to manifest in finding different twists and spins on the Percy Jackson mythos. Right. So, what if this character had actually done this as opposed to what happened in the book? Or what if this Percy Jackson character met that one? Or what if this character faced this particular challenge? Or what if this completely new character had entered this very familiar world? And so I had a lot of fun writing fan fiction in the Percy Jackson universe. It was just a universe that I loved. It was filled with characters that I adored. It was filled with powers and mythologies that were familiar to me. And so I had a great time just really playing around with the universe building there. And so as I was writing, I started to turn 13 and 14 and 15, and I initially imitated the Percy Jackson prose, in those teen years. I started to go back and read through all the Percy Jackson books, which was not a difficult thing for me to do. But I tried to write exactly how the author would write it. But as time went on, I quickly fell into my own personal style. Now, my own personal style is something that I still write with today, and it's still accessible. And so you can still kind of make that tie of accessibility from my writing to the writing of Percy Jackson. But my style is one that I feel like is much more personal to me now. And I have to shout out fan fiction. I mean, fan fiction provided in the moment feedback. It provided brutal honesty for all the fan fiction writers that are in this space or that might be watching this video. You all understand, right? When you post a chapter, when you post a story, the people that comment are the ones that are looking for amazing stories. And so when they feel like they get something that is less than the bar that they had in their minds, or when they give a story a chance and they open their heart and that story disappoints them, they are not reserved and not shy about letting the author know what their gripe was or multiple gripes about your story. Right. So there was an element of brutal honesty there that I really appreciated. But I have to be honest, the brutal honesty didn't seem like it was coming from a place of bad will. Right. Instead, it seemed like it was coming from a genuine place of, I want you to understand how you can make your story better. And so I hope that my comment can help you on this. Fan fiction also helped me write on quote unquote deadlines. And so for me personally, the way that I wrote fan fiction is that I would post one chapter at a time, right? So when you debut a story, oftentimes you have to create or fill out this whole fan fiction form with all the information about your story, including the title and the summary. And what I tried to do was to, open up a new story with one or two really good, really substantial chapters. And then as time went on, I would slowly update that story as time went on, right? So when I had space, you know, between school and sports and social stuff, any free space that I had, I would fill with writing and I would update a chapter and I would post it. And again, I would get those brutal honesty comments. Now, I had to be honest, the brutal honesty comments were not all negative, right? There were times where some people were brutally positive with their feedback. I remember getting a comment, and I think I still have this saved to my phone actually. I remember getting a comment that had told me, I am so glad that you had uploaded again. I've been waiting for your next upload, you blockhead, or something like that, right? And I was like, this is the first time that somebody has insulted me and complimented me in the same fan fiction comment. That's what I mean by brutal honesty in a positive way. Right. And so there will be times where when I was writing these fan fiction stories, there are people that are waiting for that next chapter. There are people that are, constantly going to your story page, looking and hoping for a new story or for a new chapter, a new update to the story that you created. And so I would give myself deadlines to write and finish chapters by. But again, you can't skimp on quality, right? So your chapters do need to be quality, but they also need to be on a deadline. And so I found that to be an interesting dynamic because if they're not quality, again, back to that brutal honesty, your readers will let you know. When I was writing fan fiction, there was one habit that I had, which I wouldn't say is a great habit, but as I was writing, there would be times where I would look at all this feedback that I'm getting from people, and there would be times where I would change the story on the fly to accommodate the readers, right? So my story could be going in one direction, but I might get a slew of comments that say, "Ooh, if this is where the story is going, I'm going to hate this," right? And I might, just look at my notes and say, well, this is exactly where my story is going. What do I do now if all these people are telegraphing the ending? And I know for a fact that they're not going to appreciate this, right? So as a result, what I would sometimes do is change that story on the fly. Um, and sometimes it would work, and other times the new revised ending would still not have a lot of fans in my readers. So I think keeping in mind that if you're changing your story for other people, that might be a transient kind of action, and you should really write for yourself. But that's something that came to me a lot later. And then finally, if I had to think about what's the last lesson that fan fiction taught me, it's the power of character. When writing fan fiction, you are pulling characters that already exist and you're pulling them into um, a new story. And there are times where you're pulling a pre-existing character or a pre-existing world. But either way, there's something familiar that you're pulling into this new world of yours. And oftentimes I would write characters that would appear in the Percy Jackson books, and I would pull them into my stories. And what I quickly learned was that there is a extreme care for the character that showed up in my reader feedback. There would be some people that would say, "Ooh, I don't know that this character would act like this," or, "Oh, this seemed extremely, kind of out of character for this person." And so that kind of took me out of your story. And so I realized how important character was and how important characterization was. So those would probably be the biggest lessons that I learned from writing fan fiction. So from fan fiction to creative fiction was kind of a windy journey. So for context, I used to really like writing fan fiction stories, but I would write these stories and then honestly, I would delete the stories. And I would write the stories and I would delete the stories. And sometimes I would delete whole fan fiction accounts and I would make new accounts and I would, write stories from, from like those accounts. And it seemed like I had this fear of being associated with some story that had a writing style that I outgrew or it seemed like I was averse to being, tied to a story that, perhaps didn't have the best feedback. And so I used to write and delete these stories quite often. And I have to be honest, while I was engaging with the fan fiction community, there was a huge stigma towards fan fiction. There still is a lot of that now. Um, and I think for a lot of people, they see it as something that perhaps is not very constructive, or they see it as, an activity that people do when they lack creativity. They just take something that has been created and they try to, co-opt it for themselves. And so I think that for a while, I would take that shame and I would internalize it and I would say, oh no, I don't write fan fiction to people outside of the community. But then another idea would grip me and I would, kind of open my computer and I would write in kind of secrecy. Um, Additionally, what I found that I was wrestling with was when I was writing fan fiction, there would be times where I'd be maybe 50 to 60% through a story, and I would find that I would lose interest in that story and I would, you know, lose interest in that story in favor for a new idea. So my fan fiction experience was very cyclical. I would have an idea for a story, I would write it, I'd be extremely excited, and then I might lose interest, and then I might, just write a new story, and that new story might have such a juicy premise that I actually finish the story, but then I might, just get rid of the entire account and then start a new one, right? So very cyclical, almost like a circle of life kind of thing. And so I did this on and off from age 12 to honestly age 23, right? So when I graduated with my master's degree in 2020, at that point in time, I had just finished a new story that I wrote. It was the first story I wrote in a couple years, but I was in my early 20s and I was like, hey, I had all these ideas. Let me give it a shot. And it got pretty good feedback, and I was happy about that. But then Chadwick Boseman passed away in 2020, and seeing the sheer outpouring of love and support for Chadwick Boseman and his legacy, it reminded me of the legacy of my late grandmother, right? So my grandma Florence, she was a leader in her community. She was a queen mother in Salt Pond, Ghana, and she really helped others feel represented. She helped others solve their problems, and I think similar to Chadwick Boseman, she had this huge legacy that she was able to build simply because she helped others feel seen. And so I found myself asking the question, like, what do I want my legacy to be, right? How can I help others like my grandmother did? How can I make others feel seen like Bozeman and so many other Black creatives did? I knew that writing was a passion that I had. It was something that I couldn't seem to stay away from, but I just wasn't sure how I could use writing in order to um, make something that helps others. But eventually, I decided to write an original story, not fan fiction, but a story of my own, right? Using the skills that I learned from my time in fan fiction. And I have to be honest, this was really intimidating. This was not something that I had on my bingo card. This was not something that I had on my bucket list. I had thought that I was always going to be writing in secret, and that was kind of where my creative outlet was going to be, and nobody would know, and that would be the end of it. But um, the moment that I realized that this scared me was the moment that I realized that this was something worth pursuing. So, for context, I wrote my first book, which was a 150,000, monster of a YA book that was a story about a kid who has super strength and who, is just seeking a magical sword. And it was not very great. It was not very great, and it did not sell. Um, but pretty quickly afterwards, right? What I realized is that taught me, that showed me that I could write and finish an entire book by myself with original characters. And so I wrote another novel, which was a middle grade novel that was focused on the mythology of my family. So the myths and stories from Ghana. And there was definitely a huge, inspiration from Percy Jackson, but also from Tristan Strong, from um, a lot of different kinds of books that were in that space. And so the second novel, Kwame Crashes the Underworld, was my debut novel. So this presentation, hopefully, will help to give you prompts and examples to help you do the following: to figure out your original story, to create your characters, craft your antagonists, outline your story, connect your story to existing mythologies, if that's of interest, build out your world, write and finish your story, and then how to move forward. Okay. Please note that this entire presentation is based on my experience, right? These prompts and examples, these work for me, but every single writer is different. For each one of my slides, I also am trying to give plenty of examples so that you all can see how these concepts can actually manifest. And please keep in mind that if my writing style is not the same as yours, that's completely fine. These prompts should ideally help you define what your writing style is. Now, the nature of the Writers Workout Conference is that you all are likely watching this presentation. So feel free to pause the recording if you need to take notes or take pictures, and then just see if you can adapt any of this to your writing journey. Okay. So the first thing that you want to think about if you're trying to transition from fan fiction or from Wattpad or from any of those online sites to a new original story, um, think to yourself, what kind of story do you want to tell? Right? If you think about your fan fiction stories or your previous stories, were there any shared qualities in those stories? Are you a person that really likes romance? Are you a person that is a huge fan of a lot of fighting, right? Found family, right? Like what kind of qualities show up in your stories? What things are you drawn to, right? So thinking about that can help you determine what genre you want to write. Additionally, you should also think about what's the purpose of your story. Is the purpose of your story to entertain? Is it to teach? Is it to represent, to deconstruct, right? Does your story have more than one goal? And if so, what's the primary goal? What are the themes of your story, right? Are your themes extremely timely, right? So are these themes in the, zeitgeist of today? Or are they timeless? Are they themes that people have been writing about for ages, right? Or are they both? Are they both timely and timeless, right? So thinking about which your themes of your story will be helpful in terms of grounding where you go next. Um, but one thing that I wished I would have asked myself earlier is what's the age group, right? Why this age group specifically? Keeping in mind that a middle grade story and a YA story, so I've written in both genres now, middle grade and YA are quite different, right? So my writing style had to change from middle grade to YA, even though the voice was similar. I needed to make sure that I changed the style of how I wrote in order to fit the genre. Also, please keep in mind that if you are a writer, right, you likely have storytelling strengths. So you likely have things that you are very good at, um, and things that you really gravitate towards as a writer. So thinking about what things do you need to be intentional about as you write? What have you gathered from your fan fiction or other storytelling experiences? And then finally, what's the goal for this story? So, a personal example, right? Kwame Crashes the Underworld is a fantasy adventure that not only entertains readers, but it's also meant to push them to accept their emotions and culture. A Method of Magic and Misfortune is a grounded magic-based story that empowers readers to recognize and leave toxic and or abusive relationships. Okay. Now, thinking about who will take the reader through this story. So I know that as somebody that used to write fan fiction, original characters can be intimidating, right? Fan fiction already provides you three-dimensional characters that you can pull from other sources into your story that you can then play around with. But who will your original characters be, right? How many points of view or is your story going to have? And so keep in mind that it's okay to draw inspiration from your favorite characters, perhaps even the characters that you write fan fiction of. But the way that I framed it is that I have the ability to create new characters that people will love. Right. And I think that that's really a great privilege to do. And so creating original characters, there is a joy in that. Um, but I also know that that's quite intimidating, right? So if you're drawing a blank for what your original character will be, don't hesitate to look at your own unique experiences and people. So it could be yourself, it could be a friend, it could be a parent, right? But you're surrounded by characters in your entire life. So thinking about what your character is going to be can be helpful, or you can, find where your character is going to go to by looking at the characters around you. Additionally, what relationship do you want the audience to have with your character? What relationships does your main character have? Showing these relationships helps with characterization. If you have a secondary main character, which most stories do, these characters should be vibrantly characterized. They should almost be able to be the main character of their own story. When you're thinking about your main characters, think about what's their personality. What do they want? Why do they want it? Most main characters should be as realistic as possible, right? But how do you make your characters three-dimensional? So in my example, right, I got to write two main characters that will show up in traditionally published books. Kwame is geeky, he's sarcastic, he's impulsive, and he's sassy at times. He wants to be comfortable, right? He wants to kind of stop being life's punching bag, but life has other plans. Marcus Penwriter, who's the protagonist of my second novel, he's responsible. He's risk averse. He can be insecure, but he's really, really convicted. He wants to be of use and to be helpful to others, but he won't let himself be a kid. Right? He's so overtaken by these goals that he feels like he cannot afford to just have some fun. So Kwame and Marcus probably would not get along, at least at first, right? But this understanding of who your characters are should be able to take you through the rest of your story. The antagonizing force is something that is extremely necessary for any story that people tell. When it comes to fan fiction, it can give the writer a foundation to bounce off of, right? A writer can use familiar enemies from other stories, other authors, and they can bring them into that story to represent a new challenge, right? Conflict is often cited as necessary for any story to happen. And for conflict to happen, there must be that antagonizing force. Often, this antagonizing force is a character, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, right? Stories like Encanto don't have that traditional antagonist, but the characters are instead fighting against generational trauma. And so trust your creativity when you're creating an antagonizing force. How does this antagonizing force challenge your characters? What are the stakes? If your antagonizing force is a character, then how is that character characterized? Right? How does your antagonizing force relate to people that aren't your main character? Do they see themselves as the main character, or do they see your main character as the main character? This nuance can help to build out your world, right? So, for example, in Kwame Crashes the Underworld, Nancy is the main antagonizing force, right? And in this next slide, I'll break down his character, his goals, his worldview, and his relationship to the main character. So, in Kwame Crashes the Underworld, Nancy is cunning, confident, and prideful. He's the youngest in his godly family. He cares about his family quite a bit. He used to be really mischievous, but mischief has kind of lost its appeal ever since his mother, the Mother Earth goddess, passed away. At this point, Nancy blames humans for his mother's death, right? He sees humans like one might see meddlesome cats, small, strange, and selfish, a little hairy, but they have a strange tendency to kind of chase their own tails, to do things that seem silly to him because he has a higher knowledge. Nancy perceives humans as feeble creatures who have managed to take his favorite person in this universe away from him. And it's not fair that they just get to continue to live their short, ridiculous lives with no consequences. And so subsequently, he decides to pull humans from this earth like weeds. Nazi needs to figure out how to bring his mother back because, of course, in Nazi's mind, she can't truly be gone, right? He needs to be clever enough to find out how to do the impossible, which is to bring a goddess who's supposed to be, you know, undying, how to bring that goddess back to life. Nazi looks at the rest of his family and he sees his brother is in denial. His father has sunk into a depression, right? And Nazi believes he's the only one who can take care of this. He needs to figure out how to fix things just like his mother would. And so, if prompted, if I needed to, I could actually write a story about Nazi's entire journey. I could write a novel about Nazi's journey during the specific events of Kwame Crashes the Underworld, right? Being able to understand my antagonizing force this deeply allows me to flesh out this character in Kwame's eyes, right? Nazi's grief helps to mirror Kwame's own journey of grief, right? And both are grieving the loss of powerful, graceful, and regal women who served as maternal figures to them. So there's a lot in common that these two characters have, and yet they would never see that when they look at each other. And so the events of the story help both Kwame and Nancy confront their grief. So when you're writing antagonizing forces, please try to make sure that you understand them as well, or even better than your main character, because in those interactions, that's what helps people feel three-dimensional. So in terms of figuring out where your story is going to go, fan fiction sometimes provides writers with a starting point, right? So in those fan fiction stories that are kind of fan sequels to a certain story, that provides writers with the starting point. It gives you all the lore, all the backstory in the established published stories. And then a fan fiction writer can just take that and run with it and use their imagination. Fan fiction can sometimes provide an ending point, right? So there are times where fan fiction writers will try to write prequel type stories, where they have an ending point. They know where the lore is going to go after that ending point, but instead they decide to write an entire story that covers what happens before that ending point. So for original stories, you'll have to figure out where both your starting and your ending points are. And so when figuring this out, you can always go back to your theme. What's the point of this story? Right? This should help with your direction. Personally, I outline every story before writing one word, right? It's like pulling up a GPS, for example, before pulling out of a parking spot, right? To know where you're going to go, to know how long it's going to take, that's going to be pretty helpful, right? I also like adding certain cool moments or certain like cool lines in this outline so that as I am writing the actual story, I know that I'm excited to get to those cool moments that I had, you know? And so when you're writing, also think about what you're ending. How does it tie to the beginning? Is there a clear through line from your beginning to your ending? And does your character get what they want in the end? Right? Because all people want something, whether it is to exist or to be left alone or to build relationships, all characters want something. And so, does your character get what they want in the end? If they do, why do they get it in the end? Does that line up with your theme? If they don't get what they want in the end, why not? Right? Both options can be equally viable in a story. You just need to make sure that it fits with where your story is trying to go. You can also think about how does your main character end the story with the antagonizing force? Do they quote unquote win against the antagonizing force? Do they lose? Do they have to accept the force? Right. So in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is a fantastic movie, which had no business being as good as it is, right? The main character was facing the personification of death, right? He can't win against death, but part of the entire story is he needed to find a way to accept the fact and to embrace the fact that death will get him at some point, right? So he wasn't going to win. He didn't necessarily lose either. He had to accept the antagonizing force for that story to come full circle. And then finally, which is kind of a pretty common piece of advice, make sure that your main character changes from the beginning to the end. There are some stories where the journey is that the main character does not quite change from point A to point B, but I think that that's doable, but just make sure that you have a really strong understanding of how to change your main character before you choose not to. Okay. And then also thinking about whether those themes, as we had mentioned, are well fleshed out and communicated in a satisfying way. So in Kwame Crashes the Underworld, for example, the book starts with Kwame refusing to admit that he's grieving the loss of his grandmother. He's dreading going to Ghana to attend his grandmother's celebration of life. And the book ends with Kwame choosing to go to Ghana, right? He's embracing his culture. Um, and he also chooses to go to his grandmother's celebration of life, right? Which is accepting the grief that he's feeling. And so the start and the end of this book connect together and provide a through line of Kwame's journey. For me personally, my both books actually take inspiration from existing mythologies, right? And so fan fiction writers actually have a lot of practice with this. They're skilled at drawing from existing mythologies and then spinning, twisting, or flipping it in some kind of way. And so similarly, some authors draw from existing world mythologies for their original stories. Percy Jackson, Tristan Strong, Haru Shah. These are some examples of using mythology as a backdrop for an original story. And each of these stories take a respectful approach to the mythology. The authors found the core of the mythology and adapted it for their stories. And so fan fiction writers are quite good at this because oftentimes they're writing fan fiction of a book that they love or of a story that they love. And so if you choose to do this for any kind of existing mythology, make sure that you bring that same care and attention to this book, right? So research is going to be extremely important, right? You should be able to find the thesis of these mythologies. What are the non-negotiables? For those that write in fan fiction, people, as I had mentioned before, they know when characters seem out of character. Keep it in mind that if you write from any perspective of a world mythology, there are people out there that know those characters, that know those gods and know those heroes, and they can point and say this person has completely distorted what this character is supposed to stand for. Right. And so I think that there's room for you to be innovative, right? There's room to modernize these world mythologies. I mean, Greek and Norse mythology has been told and retold, but just don't forget to center the thesis of your mythologies in your story. Okay, and also be intentional about which world mythology you choose. It is quite possible that you actually have a world mythology that's connected to your family, but you need to make sure that you're being intentional about which world mythology you center so that you are respecting it accordingly. So in terms of my example, both of my books draw from African mythologies. The thesis of African spiritualities is that all living things are connected in this universal essence. And this universal essence manifests in a pantheon of gods that control the natural world, that encourage a respect for nature, that kind of emphasizes the importance of kindness, right? So those spiritualities center all of those things. So both my books center these themes, even if certain peripheral elements are modernized, right? So the underworld in Kwame Crash's The Underworld has a lot of technology. They have smartphones, they have food delivery services, right? They have a lot of things that are recognizable in modern society, but the core of respecting the natural world, of being kind to others, that core theme is still present throughout both of my stories. And so when you're thinking about building your world building should be truly immersive for the reader. You should be mobilizing the senses, right? Thinking about what your character is seeing, smelling, hearing, right? For me personally, I try to make sure that I keep all the senses in my mind as I'm making my character through their world, just thinking about what are they feeling at that moment, right? Is there anything that they're tasting? Is there blood in their mouth, right? Are they tasting iron? Um, are there, saliva glands producing a lot of it, right? Because the character is anxious. So thinking about how your character is navigating through the world through senses can be helpful for your readers because a lot of them have those same senses. So they'll be able to connect to how your character is interacting with your world. Also keeping in mind that the world around us is big. It can also be small. It can be simple, it can be complicated, it can be mysterious, it can be reliable, right? So don't be afraid of contradiction. So for example, the words night and night sound the same, but they're not spelled the same. And we don't really think about that all too often. This isn't the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, but this is one of those nuances where most people would agree that night and night do sound exactly the same, but they're just not spelled the same, nor are they used in the same context, right? To, go a little more cosmic, gravity is usually a thing, except in space, right? So there is contradiction in this world. And this world that we're in feels very lived in and it feels nuanced. So let your world have nuance and complexity and confusion, right? All of these things help your world feel more natural and keeps it from feeling artificial. Additionally, kind of keep it in mind, what do your characters feel about the world? How does the antagonizing force add to your world? And so when you're describing your world, large swaths of descriptive text can be very helpful, but also considering what the scene needs for pace and characterization and voice is also going to be important. So just for example, consider these two options of text. So the first option, the coffee shop was lined with brown walls, littered with tan tables, and encircled by string lights that glowed red, green, and blue. Chris's music squeezed out of the speakers that were nestled in the corner. Paper snowflakes swung from the ceiling. Scents of cinnamon and nutmeg swirled through the space. The baristas bounced around behind the counter like elves on Christmas Eve. Option B, the coffee shop looked and smelled just like a life-size gingerbread house. So keeping in mind that I wrote both of these passages. So both of these passages have the same writer, but one has more voice than the other does. One has more personality than the other does, but one is also more descriptive. And so if your character has a sense that is muffled or a sense that is currently coming back to them for whatever reason, you might want to focus on how that sense is coming back into being, and you might opt for option A, right? But option B can help keep that pace going in your story, and it can help use relatable experience, relatable concept in order to connect the reader to how your setting looks and to keep the story going. And so at this point, you have your themes, you have your outline, you have your character, your antagonizing force, your world building, and your inspiration slash grounding, right? You have all the building blocks needed to write your original story. And so now you need to think about, how do you write? How often? How long? Right? Do you need to get into a certain mood in order to write? How will you keep yourself inspired? Right? What encourages you? What discourages you? Being mindful about what you're exposing yourself to while you're in writing season is going to be important. There are some people that get discouraged from family members or by social media, and that will actually keep them from writing. There are some people that really rely on family members and social media to keep them encouraged, right? So just thinking about what works for you is going to be important. For me, my personal writing style is I need to write in silence. If I'm writing with music, I'll start listening to the lyrics, and all of a sudden I'll start typing the lyrics of the song while I'm trying to write you know a whole paragraph. So I need to write in some kind of silence. I usually try to keep myself to one chapter a day. I keep this as a semi-strict boundary. This can be challenging for me because there's a lot of content that wants to go out on the page, but I want to let the appetite for writing build up. I want to stop myself while I'm still excited to write and let the excitement to write build up into more excitement. So by the time that I come back to the document the next day, I'm even more excited, right? And so as time goes on, I might have new notes, I might have new ideas of things I want to explore. So I'll take those notes, I'll write those things down, and then I'll get back to the document with this renewed sense of enthusiasm. For me personally, anytime that I write, there is a sense of time dilation that happens. Um, I'll be writing for what feels like 13 minutes, and I'll check the time and 4 hours has gone by. So I know for a fact that time dilation occurs. So as a result, I don't let writing take over my day, right? I say not anymore because I used to, right? I used to start writing at 9 and then I would look at the time and it would be 5 p.m. and the entire day is gone just because I was writing. And that's not a bad day at all. But I also know that I have other obligations and responsibilities in my life, which means that I can't write all day for 8 hours every single day. And so as a result, I try to keep myself to a controlled space of writing. And then in the meantime, when I'm not writing, I challenge myself to consume all different kinds of stories. So books, TV shows, movies, poems. I pull inspiration from watching other people's creativity on the page or on the screen. And so finally, what's next? So say that you've gotten to this finish line, you've completed an original story, right? First of all, just first off, you need to celebrate yourself. Okay. You need to celebrate the fact that you've completed an original story because there are so many people that say that they want to write a book, and yet a very, very, very small percentage of them actually finish any kind of story. So make sure that you celebrate yourself once you've gotten to the point where you have an original story. Okay. But now the journey is not quite over. You need to make sure that you need to edit your book. Okay. You need to edit again and edit again, right? But while you're editing, you also need to make sure that you are reading your book from the perspective of a reader. And you need to also make sure that you're reading other books that are in your genre. So if you're writing for a YA murder mystery, right, it's going to be important for you to read other murder mysteries that have been published in the same way that you're looking for. So you can get a sense of what is working in this story. And is there anything here that I can take to my story? Additionally, thinking about what's next and what's the next step for your story is going to be important. Do you want to pursue traditional publishing? Do you want to pursue self-publishing? Do you want to publish your story on some kind of website, right? Why do you want your story to be shared this way? For me personally, I was in the traditional publishing camp. And so for me and my experience, traditional publishing often includes collaboration with agents and editors, publishing companies. And so it's a collaborative effort. It's a group effort. And so is traditional publishing your vision? And if so, what agent or editor or publisher do you want and why? So be mindful about which path you choose and how that affects your relationship with storytelling. To publish any kind of story, it takes a lot of work. My personal experience with traditional publishing really improved my writing, but to be in a traditional publishing realm challenged my insecurities and pushed me out of my comfort zone. Okay. And so I know that that can be the same for self-publishing. So please keep in mind there are so many paths that you can go down, but just think what is best for you and what's best for your story. So as you are going through and you're publishing a book, I know this went way over 30 minutes. Um, but as you are going through this book creation process, and you're trying to navigate all the intricacies and the mysteries of publishing, please know that there are a lot of people here that are ready to be here for you. And so for me personally, my agent, my editors, and my fellow authors really help to support me through this process. And so lean on your support systems as time goes on. I would also like to offer myself as a resource for you. For me, honestly, publishing was a difficult field to navigate. I did a lot of things wrong. I sent the wrong emails. I did the wrong things, right? And so I did that because I didn't quite know what the right things were. And so I would love to help other writers that are trying to navigate this field. And so please note that my contact information is here. So feel free to pause this video and take a picture or to utilize this contact information. I genuinely hope that this presentation has helped anybody that is familiar with fan fiction. I hope that this helps you on your road to creative fiction. And please know that I'm here as a resource if you have any questions at all. Okay. I would like to thank all the people that are putting on the Writers Workout Conference. This was a great opportunity. And I hope that all of you have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself and drink plenty of water. All right. Thanks so much. Bye.